long term, but just to take money or to take, let's say, for instance, the airports. The airports were given for just very few money, and it was sure that they would bring money back very quickly because the tourists are growing up all years. So that was about the factors, and they did not focus on how to make the state work effectively, and to make the changes that were needed for Greece to work effectively. The politicians, they argue for everything, but not how to get out from the crisis. This is total out of the discussion, the public discussion. And the people, and also the mixture of the policy was to strike down the middle class, which was the basis of the Greek economy. The middle class was doing business, it was the 93% of the total business in Greece. So the West strike down. If you walk down to Academia Street, you will find all the closures, all the shops closed, and also by pointing out that everybody saying that the state is the big problem, and we have to cut the large of the state. Hundreds of people were forced, hundreds of people, state employees, they were forced to early pension, which on the same time.
So the state continues to pay them?
Yes, the state without working. Yes. So I think that this is the framework of what the crisis and why we're still living on it.
Take a few questions. So first you, and then we'll move to the back, and then we'll go from here. Yeah.
There was previously a question regarding the social change in consumer appreciate because our society is aging in Europe.
Aging, yeah.
However, I was asking, don't you think that in a very unconscious, in a very chaotic way, the elections of Trump or Marine Le Pen, the support for her in Italy now, don't you think that in a very chaotic and unconscious way, our European society is trying to push for some change in research, for something? It's not basically a scenario, but somehow this is happening through them. And another question regarding the mentality, because I come from Bulgaria, we have very similar mentality.
Serbia here.
However,
All the Balkans.
I find it very sad because you say that we should work with the mentality and not try to find to change it. I think it's sad because I want my country to be like a proper European country, as we say. And politicians should try to change that. They should try to give a good example of that. I know it's very hard, but otherwise we are going to end up in the same circle. There will be no change at the end.
Well, I won't come back to the question I did because a lot of things were said about Greece, which are very interesting and specific. The question in a society is, do you create a state based on what kind of society you have, or do you have something in your imagination as a perfect, the Platonic society and state, and then you build upon that. And the 20th century has taught us that the second is not a very good idea. And still in Greece, we are trying to fantasize that we can have a Danish state with Greek citizens.
And to the south.
Yes, Denmark of the south. It's totally impossible. It's totally impossible to have a big state when the mentality of personal buying and selling of the vote is so entrenched that it will take hundreds of years, and artificial intelligence within our brains to break that. So this is the real question. Can we change the people in the image of the state, or should we build a state in the image of the state?
Just wanted to discuss 2 or 3 points, if I may. It's justified to say that the state is a big problem in the case of Greece, but on the same time, I mean, a correct policy, in my view, would be to reorganize the state, to create a smarter state, leveraging also on digital technologies, and at the same time try to create institutions that favor entrepreneurship and private, let's say, initiative. And we haven't done much on that. I mean, we're discussing about the state and how it functions, but we don't discuss and we don't do things on how to make doing business easier, about the, let's say, the forολογικό, how we call it, tax policies, human capital, from where we're going to find human capital. Are we going to establish policies to bring all those Greeks back, or even foreign capital, to give motivation, you know, to policies, yes, to bring those people here. So I think that the state is an issue in Greece, it needs to be organized, but at the same time we need in parallel policies, aggressive, active policies, to create a wealthy and extrovert private sector. Because the private sector had a problem. Small companies never had the scale. They were always relied on internal consumption. So when this fell with the cutoff of foreign money coming into the country, in a few years we lost 25% of our GDP. So we need to restructure also the private sector. That was just a few points.
Yeah, I wanted to ask not so much about who you think we should have done with the crisis, but with, can you hear me?
Little louder, yeah.
You mentioned a lot about the dearth of ideas, different ways of doing things, so we had nothing to adopt after the 2008 crisis. Are there any new ideas, new ways of thinking that you've seen since 2008 that you found interesting or with potential, especially in light of our new technology? Like, I know you mentioned it as a joke, but with technology such as AI.
Be a joke for
Not
much
for long,
longer.
no, not for long.
No.
Yeah, just on the question of the people and the leaders, Phil's mentioned, you know, the government outsourcing things to the central bank. You mentioned about political leaders in Greece, and I know it's the same in the UK and elsewhere, outsourcing authority to the European Union or Germany or wherever, really not taking responsibility as a big factor in a whole number of areas. So in many ways, it's not that surprising if people then themselves are not that confident or inspired or sort of become fed up with their leaders and don't see anybody to look to. And it's almost like what Phil's describing is some kind, I don't know, cowardice is probably the wrong word, but there's a sense where people in authority don't have authority or they don't take responsibility politically or whatever. I know in the UK, we voted, like the gentleman said about reaction, people voted for Brexit, and part of that was that the government in the UK hand over decisions, they hide behind the European Union, they hide behind something else, people are fed up and they decide we want to try and take, you know, have something different, change something. It's a reaction to that. You know, how can that work through? Is it inevitable there will be this outsourcing of power and not taking responsibility? And is there a way that we can address that other than just having sort of spasms or bursts of protest? How can we begin to change that?
And I think kind of what you're getting at is there. It seems to be that the only quote-unquote progressive causes are quite reactionary, ironically, that there isn't a sort of progressive left or in politics as well. So I want to come back to Phil first, and then move to Tony.
Okay, is this our, no.
Sorry?
No.
No.
I mean, I think this point about left and right is probably worth exploring as well, because I think that those divisions, while they still exist as labels, are completely meaningless. I mean, in country after country, you will see that the left is perhaps supporting censorship or supporting restrictions on freedom, and the right, which used to be seen as conservative and backward, sometimes comes up with quite sensible ideas. The old labels no longer give you a real sense as to what is going on. So I think the new political divide, which I think is much more interesting, which a number of people have commented on, is between those who want to simply hang on to the present and those who are at least open to the idea of change. And I think, the political divide between those who are saying this is the best we can really expect, people are a bit greedy or they're a bit lazy or whatever, nothing really will change, we can sort of muddle through. That's a very dominant position within society. And then you have some in a, what you said, chaotic way, in a non-political way even, or a pre-political way, saying actually the present is not all that there can be. I'm not prepared to say that this is all that we've got, after 250 years, 300 years since the Enlightenment. I feel there could still be a better world coming. And so that new divide between those who are in favour of the way things are, the status quo, the stability of the present, as opposed to those who are at least open to the idea of change, even if it's not very politically developed, is, I think, where we should be looking for change. I mean, to come back to your point in the sort of sociological idea of change, change or progress needs three things. It needs a motivation. And historically, big crises have created the opportunity for people to think, is this all we got, or can we do something different? It requires the means, and the means is generally new ideas and new ways of doing things, or new visions of the future. And it requires a sort of motor. And I think, and the means only really comes in the motor, and the motor is the politics. The motor is not just that the old ways aren't working, but enough people are saying, we want to try a new way of doing things. And it's that I think has been lacking for the last sort of 30 years. And when you ask, is there anything new that is interesting or exciting, I think what is new is what you're describing here. I think what is new is the fact that for 30 years, people in most countries, I'm not talking specifically about Greece here, but people in most Western countries were disengaged. You had falling electoral turnouts. So, people couldn't see that politics was relevant to them, and the politicians were, as Jeffrey there was describing, was really just looking after themselves. They weren't really interested in the people. As long as they could get elected every 4 years or 5 years, there was a big gulf opening up between the political class who looked after themselves, stabilising the way things are, and the ordinary people who couldn't see that politics was helping them and got disengaged. Right? It got, and just weren't involved really. So lower voter turnouts. What's changed in the last 4 years really, since 2013, 2014, is that in country after country, in a chaotic, sort of unclear way, more people have said, I'm prepared to vote for something which is different. I'm prepared to take a risk on something that's different. I mean, I think if you just take Trump as an example. Now we all know, the world knows Trump is an idiot, that he's unable to work out a coherent plan, that he is self-preoccupied, all these sort of things. He'll say one thing one day and something different 2 days later. I think the American people knew that about Trump before the rest of us knew that, but they were still prepared to vote for him because he wasn't the establishment. He wasn't Washington. He wasn't Hillary Clinton. When Hillary Clinton described, his supporters as the deplorables, if you remember that. He said, all people who support Trump are deplorable. you know, people, Americans, got T-shirts saying, "I'm one of the deplorables," you know, because this summed up the contempt which ordinary people felt the establishment in Washington had for them. They either ignored them, patronized them, or treated them with contempt. And that's why people voted for Trump, even though people knew Trump was a misogynist and a self-centered, self-preoccupied person, because he was different. And I think you could say the same. I agree with what your thesis. Regardless of the merits or demerits of the various parties or groups or ideas which are being voted for by what you described as the populists, right? It's the people are voting for change, right? They don't quite know where it's going to go. And it's not coherent, and that's the problem we have today. But it's a different problem than we had 6 or 7 years ago when people were disengaged. So I think those rumblings of people beginning to do it, or as the Greek people did here, as you voted in your referendum in 2015. I know we chatted about this before the meeting began. You know, I saw that as a more positive thing. You saw it as quite a, not well. I won't put words into your mind, but you can come up. I think that's a positive thing that people were prepared to say, you know, we've had enough of this austerity. We've had enough of Brussels, trampling over us. We've had enough of this situation of people from the outside telling us what to do. We want to take control. That's what people in Britain were voting for with Brexit. It was a sense of, taking a bit of control. Taking control back was the slogan. It didn't go further than that so far, but at least that creates an opportunity to have a political discussion.
That happened also in 1933.
Oh dear. Okay.
Exactly the same.
Not exactly the same, no.
Exactly.
Not
They
at all.
wanted change.
Not at all.
Okay.
They have changed.
I would be more
You have a low opinion of people.
pessimistic
what you say.
on your view, because what we see here in Greece, that is in theory, people here voted for change, because they change people, leaders. We voted for Tsipras and Syriza, which was quite new, but the ideas behind it and the political behavior was as old as it was 30 years ago, the worst behaviors of the past. So, and on top of that, we have a very weak response to all our pending problems, with the consequence to face, our society faces a distraction. The question is, can this distraction be transformed to a creative one? This is something what we will see. In some areas, Syriza, the new government we have 4 years now, made us some favors. It proves, for instance, that the state cannot be fixed, because it's a big carcass. Everybody wants a piece of it. We are like the small fishes. This is a big whale, unable to move, and everybody goes to feed itself from this carcass. This is something we should understand. Of course, we need a functioning state. I'm not an anarchist. We need a state which supports the basic functions of the society. But here, we pretend to have one, and we don't have. As I told you at the beginning, we play theater, but we have a state. We don't have a state. We have an army of occupation. This is the state. It's an army of occupation. Most of people do nothing. They get paid. They refuse to have sociology, evaluation. They refuse it. It's a red line. You cannot impose evaluation in the public sector. You run to cut your throat. No politician has ever been successful to implement it. It's an army of occupation. So long as it's an army of occupation, my suggestion is that let's accept it. It's an army of occupation.
Using the Greek word, an army of
Occupation. An internal army of occupation. My suggestion is, let's face it, accept it. It's an army of occupation. Let's do it smaller, less expensive. It's impossible to have the salary. The average salary in the public sector is 20% higher than the average salary in the private sector. This is a great anomaly. How can we fix it? Raise the salaries in the private sector? It's impossible to impose this because we will close maybe 30% of our economy. We should lower the wages in the public sector. This is the logic. It's impossible to operate and to have a new investment in a new evolution in the private sector unless we cut the taxation deep, because now it's 55% average. 58, 55, 65, I have heard a lot of numbers, all above 50. How can these small companies, you say, how they can build capital to grow? Impossible. They cannot.
This is on the black economy.
Yeah.
Only black economy is functioning.
They're forced to. They're forced to.
Force the life.
So if we lower the economy, to,
Otherwise, they cannot survive.
if we lower the taxation, we lower also the obligation. Because now it is not only the taxation. I can say you an example. In our group of companies, we have a very successful industry, makes insulation products. We try to get permit to use water. We have a well. It's 10 years. 10 years the state cannot give us permit to use our water. We are outlawed. Anybody can close us every moment. Or we give bribes. So how can we must cut obligation, regulation, red tape, personnel, in order to revive our economy. This is the only way.
But how's that going to come without people getting engaged and trying to make that change? It's not going to come through a change of leadership again.
I
through
see what must be done.
separate-
I am not optimistic that it can be done. That's why a lot of people are leaving, but I'm thinking of leaving myself at the end.
Okay, I want to have time to, so this will be the last round of questions, and after which we'll come back and then there'll have to be closing statements, so keep in mind anything you want to come back on from that as well. Yeah?
Question and remark at the same time. Having heard all of the remarks and all the views, my view is that for the long-term change, and I know that this will sound as a very cliche statement, the key is education. It is true for the average citizen, the voter, and it is true for the politician. People should learn to think about their own interests, about the general interests, work with each other, have a common values to look for. And I'm speaking for Greece because I know that in other countries the educational systems are different. Notably, Scandinavian countries have much better educational systems. But in Greece, I think what is severely lacking at the level of teachers, professors, and at the end, pupils and students, is a good quality education that will help people learn how to think.
Not only good quality education, but also economically skilled education. In Greece, we are not taught about economics at all, at least below the university level. But a small statement, not a question, because I suppose we are close to the end. In Greece, we have a misperception that the public sector can be made to work better. This function can work better instead of reducing it. You see, those are the two sides of the same coin. Complexity and size are interlinked heavily. As the complexity grows, we need growth in terms of size to handle with those complexities. And as size grows, then the more people demand more complexity in order to justify their existence. So both sides of the same coin. We cannot fix one or the other. We have to do both simultaneously and severely.
I just want to pitch in. Okay, so my key message is need or necessity is the mother of innovation or inventions. And it's kind of very symbolic because we're sitting here and talking about change. It's what is the trigger for change. And yeah, I just thought this was yeah. And I'm politics in one body. I've lived through the 90s in Serbia, through all the war years, through all the protests, through everything, bombing, and lived in Scandinavia for 9 years, Norway. So I know all about Norwegian education. I have a master's in media and communication from University of Bergen. I speak fluent Norwegian, and that is what brought me to Greece. So about the private sector and taking in I'm imported goods. So I'm imported brains, fluent Norwegian language, and I wouldn't have gotten my work permit here if I hadn't had that, fluency in Norwegian, because they couldn't find enough, because it's very difficult to get Norwegians to come here, because they would get five times less, payroll salary per year, per month. So, for me, I'm so excited. I live by Stavros Niarchos, and I just passed by it today, and I was thinking how it's fantastic that Athens is a combination of modern, antique, old culture. And I was thinking here there are all these people, like how I pictured the old Greece when I learned about the philosophers, and there are people doing some exercising. And here is agora, right? The philosopher. This is just. I'm sorry. I'm very. It's and yeah. Thank you. It's wonderful. I don't think I have any specific questions for the panelists, but I just want to thanks for the organization.
And then just last question.
I was just covered before from the previous person.
Okay, that's a good question to end with. Thank you. Okay, so we'll come back, and if you just pick on a few things and just give your final closing sort of statements. A 2-3 minutes. You've got a bit of time.
From the discussion, what I have to emphasize is that the political consequences of all this environment internationally in Greece has very big similarities with what happened in the 30s. A stagnant economy, happy at the end, at first during the 20s, then facing problems during the big crisis, and at the end we have the wars. Creative distraction, but creative at the end, because some of the weaknesses of the financial and the war system was fixed through the death of 120 million people. So maybe we are in the same phase. We don't have the war as an imminent threat to the society, but we have internal stretches which can separate people, classes, and create new fronts. For instance, in Europe and in Greece also, it's a new front between the local element and the foreign element. That was behind Brexit, that is behind CFG here, or
of immigration, of immigrants.
Salvini in Italy. So the globalization creates movements of people unprecedented from the past. I was reading an article, a press conference of one person from the United Nations, predicting that up to 2025, 5 million of African people will be at the move to enter Europe. 5 million. This is something which Western societies will face more and more in the future. So maybe this is not war, but the tensions are rising. and we must take care that the desire for change does not transform into a bloodshed, even if it does not touch ourselves.
I'm not going to question some of the descriptions you gave of a very dysfunctional state, but what I would just suggest is that states become dysfunctional when there is a stasis underneath them within society. That these, phenomena of corruption, crony capitalism as described, people looking after themselves regardless of the consequences for others, that is are various personal symptoms or subjective symptoms of a society which is going nowhere. It's about survival. It's not a matter of saying these are naughty people or whatever. It's a matter of that's the way you survive in a stagnant society. And I'm saying my basic thesis is that we don't have to be living in a stagnant society. There are some people who are saying that's the best there is, and they happen to be the ones who are pulling the strings at the moment. And they're looked after themselves all right because they're up at the top, so they can get a little bit of the slightly bigger crumbs than the rest of us to maintain themselves. But it doesn't need to be that way. I mean, one strong point of agreement we've had is to say that the problem that we have, and this is the theme of my book on creative destruction, which is that too much of state activity is about propping up the obsolete you described, the businesses that have really got no future, the unprofitable businesses who are just able to take over. I mean, the phenomenon is called, as you probably know, zombie businesses. They're businesses which don't make enough to earn good profits and to be able to expand. They only survive because they're able to borrow money at 1%, 2%, and they can just sort of take over. And you're right, so that is underpinned by a state function, a state system, which keeps those businesses going. I think we agreed that you have to clear that out. I mean, a number of people have made this point. You have to have a restructuring, not just of the state, but a restructuring of the private sector to open things up. So all the new ideas which we can see, the robots and the AI and the artificial intelligence, which there's too little of at the moment. The ideas are there, but they're not being rolled out in society because too many businesses are just trying to survive or just trying to tick over. So there's not the scope for business to invest in long-term future. Now, I think the main difference, though, is that I'm a bit more positive about seeing signs of people wanting to change things, because none of this is pre-established, none of this is fixed, none of this is set in stone that things cannot be better. We haven't run up to the end of history, we haven't exhausted a change. What's been exhausted is the old political system, and in a very chaotic, unclear, incoherent way, we can see signs of a new politics developing. At the moment, we don't have politics. We've got the elites up here looking after themselves, and we've got the rest of people who are either disenchanted, and I imagine there's a lot of disenchanted people here because of all the promise that Cyprus and the referendum had, and then nothing changed. So you'll have disenchanted people, but the difference between being disenchanted and beginning to ally yourself with a more positive view of the future is not that big, I don't think. As I say, to take the example of Britain, because I'm not as close as all you are to the Balkans or to Greece, 6 months before the referendum, in the end of 2015, politics was going absolutely nowhere in Britain, and out of nowhere, the majority of people voted for taking a chance, taking a change. That happened. Now, many of those people may be a bit disenchanted because Brexit is not going anywhere, but at least they began to indicate that they were prepared to take a risk. And I think in America, people were prepared to take a risk. I think even people in France and in Germany and in Scandinavia, people who voted for oppositional parties are really voting against the old established ways and are beginning to take a risk. And that, to me, is a positive sign. It's still pre-political, but it's a scope for being able to create a new political vision.
If I may say,
I'm afraid that's all the time we've actually run out of time. Well, that's the thing.
That's up to us to stop that happening.
Yeah.
It's up to the people. That again wasn't automatic.
there'll be time to discuss after as well. I can see we have more questions. I think just to sort of bring it together, I think what we're trying to say is people are prepared to take a risk, but is politics prepared to take a risk? It's kind of where we are right now. You know, who in politics right now is prepared to take a risk is the question.
The positive side of this
Yes. So thank you.
process, you know the dangers of this process.
Yes, it's.
Yep.
The old
Take a
phrase
risk.
was socialism or barbarism, huh? If I can just be a leftist for a second. Okay, so thank you very much. I want to thank the Free Thinking Zone and Areti and our speakers. So thank you. Right.
Can we have a drink here or not? Is that-
Yes.
We can.
Yes.
Then we can carry on the conversation.
Yeah, we can carry on the conversation. Yeah, that was what popped into my head. I was thinking, like, nobody's mentioned it, but actually, it does seem we're kind of going in this. Are we going to review this? Or is it just going to be perfect?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, that's the more that people worry about the United States. The trouble is, they want it instant because it's for a change. At the end of the day, it's changed.
I just pressed stop.
I'm not an expert, but it's recording.
Okay, I see zeros there. My last conversation. It jumped into my head. He was sort of saying, like, we're going to go into the 1930s. And I was thinking, well, unless we sort of reinvigorate some kind of leftist progress, obviously, or some sort of progressive progress or something, that's all there is now. The only people who are saying, oh, something different. Crazy people.
Are you sure? Maybe you have some friends for
There's also no option. Like, everyone talks about the United States like legalization of the rabid masses. They vote for this kind of somebody mentioned, you know, people voting for change was serious, but all we got was different people saying the same thing.
It's like, you can see where it is.
And it really is, but also it's so wrong in all ways as well. So this idea that really what we need is just better PR, you know, really that's what it's been that way for a long time, but I think actually people don't want that anymore. I think people don't want that anymore.
Σίγουρα. Δεν ξέρουμε πώς θα ζήσει. Θα ζήσει 15, 10.
Well, no, I think the millennials are too busy playing mortgages right now. I didn't even underestimate or overestimate the risk collection. So I think the theories that really miscalculated how much risk we were willing to take. They just thought, oh, the populace wants to stay in the EU, it's not the case. But actually, I think people were willing to risk leaving the EU. And they completely misread.
Would have been forced.
But the disruption that's necessary also might have been accepted a little bit more because it was in the name of selling rather than and also the euro was
Αλλά στον πρώτο εκπαιδευτικό κόσμο ήταν όπως το λόγο των οικονομικών σου είπαν κάποιοι.
And it's also quite scary. Well, no, they would have revealed the fact that people don't actually know what the hell is going Yeah, I like the metaphors that people have been taught to hear. So this is that's really they haven't got a clue. It's quite clear. Yeah, that they don't care. It's just kind of like, all right, this whole thing, we'll just put a band-aid here. Well, another crisis is COVID as well. I've become more and more convinced of that. Because the destruction that needed to happen and everybody's just sort of, and then we can have a real long depression instead of a serious, destructive phase. Nobody wants to reset the consequences, and nor should they. That's what I was trying to get at. I mean, accepting the consequences means like wiping out a generation.
Because